We begin by looking at lines where black meets d4 with d5, but does not necessarily continue with c5. Now, you want to pay attention to this chapter because this approach is very popular for black at club level. Most black players, when encountering the London, they don't have a particular line prepared. They tend to just put their pieces on good squares. So while these lines are theoretically less challenging to white, and we therefore believe white can get a slight advantage in many of these lines, you should take your time with these because you'll probably encounter them a lot in practice. So the first line we'll take a look at is a form of the Shigorin, if you will. So after d4, d5, bishop f4, our preferred move order, black playing knight c6. And I've talked about in my YouTube videos how in a d-pawn opening, the black knight and the c-pawn, or for white, the white knight and the c-pawn, often represent a marriage. And a knight on c6 in front of the black pawn on c7 is an unhappy marriage. You would much rather have the pawn be up here on c5 if you're black in order to generate pressure on d4. With the knight on c6, contrary to an e4, e5 opening where that often happens, it's less desirable here because it's going to be hard to bring about further pressure on this pawn. White doesn't have to worry about that in this line. So we advocate that white just plays e3 here. Very, very often white will play e3 and then knight f3 and continue from there. In some cases, after e3, you might develop your bishop, continue delaying the development of the kingside knight, but in many of these lines, e3, knight f3 is what we're going to be seeing. So knight f6, knight f3, and now bishop g4, logical move, pinning the knight. Black is looking to develop this bishop before playing e6. If black were to play e6, we'll probably get positions of the type that we'll see in the next line. I don't think this is a great idea for black because the bishop is sort of blocked in unnecessarily. So bishop g4. And now we like this move knight bd2. Often a good reaction, so having these knights be in contact with each other, it gives white just a nice option of recapturing with the knight should black ever decide to take on f3. e6. And now a helpful move, very common move in the London, h3. And the purpose of the move here is twofold. So we attack the bishop on g4, force black to make a decision whether black wants to take or retreat the bishop. And we also create a cubbyhole for the bishop on h2. That is a big theme in the London. Playing h3 and being able to play bishop h2 if this bishop is harassed, especially by this black knight coming to h5, is very, very convenient for white. So bishop h5. Taking on f3, on the other hand, would not bother white in the slightest. Knight takes f3. White has the bishop pair without having to have made any sort of concession to achieve that. Easy advantage for white. So bishop h5. And now another solid and harmonious move for white, c3. Creating this little pawn triangle right here. This takes away the b4 square from a black piece, so no need to worry about a knight coming down here, say, to harass this pawn at some stage. We also open up some options. Queen b3 is a sneaky move that you should definitely consider in many positions if you can go after this b pawn. Even in Queen's Gambit openings, I often talk about how if black develops their light square bishop very early, then queen b3 could be proper punishment at the right time in order to attack that b pawn, which is now undefended. So bishop d6. And here's another scenario that we will see very, very often in these lines. That's why this line is good to start with, because we're seeing a lot of common ideas already. So black challenging the white bishop on f4. Now, when that happens, you have several choices. So you could take, you could retreat your bishop, or you could leave the bishop there. Now, in this exact position, we advocate keeping the bishop on f4. Retreating would not be a great idea here, so quite often against bishop d6, bishop g3 will be acceptable. However, a cue to look for that might indicate whether bishop g3 is a good move or not is if you've played h3 or not. We hope you enjoyed this free preview. If you'd like to check out the full repertoire, head over to chessable.com/essentiallondon.